On today's very special episode of AP Psych, we're going to learn how babies are made. You ready? This is Unit 6, Lecture 2, Development of Prenatal and Newborn Humans. Learning targets, they're not too detailed, so, or there's not too many of them, so hopefully this one goes kind of quick. We'll see. Okay, so conception. This is when a male sperm fertilizes a female's egg. At this point, the egg blocks all other sperm because it can only be fertilized once. What many people do not know is that women are born with all the eggs they will ever have. What's kind of trippy to think about is that if you were once an egg in your mom when she was a baby, or more importantly, when she was a fetus, that means at one point you were an egg in your grandma. Crazy, crazy. So anyways, women are born with thousands of eggs, and only 1 in 5,000 actually mature and are released once a month through the menstrual years of a woman's life. Men, on the other hand, don't begin producing sperm until puberty, but then once they do, they produce it 24/7 for the rest of their life. Now let's talk about an overview of genetics. We'll define zygote separately in a moment, but genetics overall is based on these concepts. A zygote contains 23 pairs of chromosomes, 1 from the mother and 1 from the father. So we technically have 46 chromosomes in the little fertilized egg. However, each of those contains thousands of genes, and then those are genes either on their own or in combination with other genes produce the characteristics of each person. I might have said this already. If you've already learned about some of this stuff in biology, or this is just stuff that you learned in general and you don't feel the need to write down every single word, in this lecture you can probably get away with it. You just need to make sure you know the vocab terms. Okay, so let's talk specifically about genes and DNA, genes and chromosomes, and what's the difference and what do they all do. So genes are actually small sequences or combinations of DNA. Some are responsible for the development of our systems, like our heart, circulatory systems, and so on, but some control characteristics that make humans unique, such as our eye color, height, facial features, etc. If it helps you to jot this down with your little boxes here, here's an analogy that maybe will help you picture the difference. If we think of DNA as letters of words, and then we think of genes as the words themselves, we can put those words together into chapters, and your chromosomes are 46 chapters in the book that is you. That might help, maybe. And then sex, in other words, gender, is determined by combination of genes. So that 23rd chromosome, if you happen to get an X and an X, you are biologically a female. If you happen to get an X and a Y chromosome, you are biologically a male. Okay, let's get into prenatal development. So the first phase of prenatal development is being a zygote. Once that egg is fertilized, it is a zygote, and this stage only lasts about 2 weeks, and fewer than half survive the first 2 weeks. So, quite frankly, many eggs get fertilized, and just nothing comes of it in terms of a baby. Then in weeks 2 to 8 after fertilization, this is considered the embryonic stage. By 4 weeks, there is a rudimentary, which is kind of it's a word that means primitive, like most earliest basic version of a beating heart. Brain and intestinal tract are all very primitive, very early, but can be recognized particularly by a trained doctor. And by 8 weeks, an embryo is about 1 inch long with arms, legs, and faces that are distinct. So let's take a brief look. Here is our zygote at fertilization. And then these are both embryos. They look like little aliens if you ask me, but this is a 4-week embryo and an 8-week embryo. Then from 8 weeks to birth, it is no longer just an embryo and it is a fetus. And this is the fetal stage. For at the 4-month mark, movement can be detected by the mother. They can feel the baby kick or move around or thump. And at 6 months, a fetus has their eyelids open and has a well-developed grasp and taste buds. Then we have, I'm just scrolling through, aren't I? At 24 weeks, this is the age of viability. This is important because this is the point which a fetus could survive if it was born prematurely. And with some of the medical advancements of our modern age, about 50% of preemie babies can survive at 24 weeks. This is extremely early. And then the percent of survival increases with each passing week. The fetus continues to grow or gain weight in the last 2 months. And so at the end of 38 weeks, the 9.5-month mark, the pregnancy is due. And on average, your average fetus weighs around 7 pounds and is 20 inches long, which is one of the reasons why people always ask when babies are born, what were their statistics? How much did they weigh and how long were they? It's kind of a benchmark. The next 2 slides are specifically going to look at prenatal influences. So, of course, in most cases, next we're going to take a look at 2 categories of things that could influence the development of an embryo or a fetus. And so prenatal influences. The first category are genetic factors, and genetic factors are referring to the major causes of genetic defects, specifically faulty genes or chromosomes. Now, we have talked about a couple of these things before, and I'm going to put a lot of text on these slides. So this is one of those times. Listen or just kind of sit back and process and then decide what you need to write down. And yes, some of these are repeats from other units. That's okay. So Down syndrome is one example of a genetic defect, and it's a defect because a zygote has gotten an extra chromosome at conception. A person can certainly live a very fulfilling life. However, to have Down syndrome would entail also experiencing a mild to moderate intellectual disability and some health and physical differences, like some different types of facial features, or other health problems like heart, vision, and hearing issues. This is more common in babies born to women over 35 years old. PKU we've learned about before, and this is a genetic defect where a human body is unable to break down protein, which could lead to intellectual disability, and we know that this one is detectable and preventable. Tay-Sachs disease is when a body is unable to break down fat, and it can build up, that fat can build up and destroy brain and nervous cells until the nervous system shuts down completely. And yes, that would be fatal. There are signs of the disease around 4 to 6 months old, and children usually pass away around age 5, or by age 5, excuse me, if they do have this disease. So this one's a pretty serious one. Then our next cluster of things that could influence the development of an embryo or a fetus are environmental factors. And okay, again, a lot. Maybe listen, take it in, and then decide what you need to write down. Teratogens is probably the most important word in this section. This is a word that means the chemicals, viruses, or other factors, other things that could enter into a pregnant woman's body that could result in a birth defect. So it could be things that she's around, perhaps extremely polluted air or water, but it also can very often come from things that she's ingesting. The results of teratogens could be mental disabilities, physical abnormalities, complications at birth, or passing the condition on to the child. So these are the things that the fetus would encounter, not the mother. So the first category of those are illnesses. And so rubella, or the German measles, syphilis, and AIDS are all things that could affect the development of a fetus or a baby. Rubella can result in blindness, deafness, heart abnormalities, or stillbirth. Syphilis could result in mental disabilities, physical deformities, and miscarriage. And AIDS can be passed down to the child prior to birth, so then they are born with it. Excessive stress can cause a fetus to not develop properly. Drug use and alcohol and nicotine use, of course, can influence the development of a human prenatally. Specifically, alcohol could cause fetal alcohol syndrome, and this results in some physical abnormalities, some brain abnormalities, problems with attention span, learning, coordination, and behavior. And then smoking could result in fewer nutrients being received by the fetus and lower birth rates. And then the final slide already, newborns. This is my niece Winnie when she was about an hour old or so. So this is newborn right here. All newborns, the characteristics that we really want to know for this class about newborns is that all are born with these 4 reflexes. A reflex, by definition, is an unlearned, involuntary responses that occur automatically in the presence of certain stimuli. Yes, you need to know the difference between these 4, but they're kind of cool. They're kind of cool to think about, like why they are and how they are. One is a rooting reflex. And this is when a baby turns their head anytime their cheek is touched because they are rooting or looking for food. And they turn their head because at this point they really can't use their hands to reach and grab. A sucking reflex, and this is to suck on anything that touches their lips, again, for the interest of finding food. The startle reflex is interesting. When a baby is startled, the infant will fling open their arms, fan their fingers, and arch their back in response to a sudden noise. They are essentially trying to make their little bodies as big as possible so mom or another caregiver could see them, but then they come back together in the fetal position to protect themselves. And then the Babinski reflex is when you stroke the sole of someone's foot. I happen to have my foot right here. First time I'm putting my foot on camera. And you stroke the side of the foot. The toes fan out. I'm not weirding out some people who have feet issues, but hey, better right here, right now than in class, right? So yeah, the Babinski reflex, when the toes fan out, when the edge of the sole of the foot is stroked. All of these reflexes are lost. In other words, they fade away after the first few months of age, and they are replaced by more complex behaviors to find food, to get attention when scared, and to fan out the foot. Okay, that's it.